Previously, on the Titans that built America. As World War I comes to a close, a new generation of Titans are on the rise.
We're in the age of the machine.
3 car makers fight for dominance.
My father, Henry Ford.
To Pierre Du Pont.
Chrysler 70.
As a battle rages to take down Ford, he and his son Edsel have their sights set on a new industry.
We should get into this.
They go head-to-head with a young upstart who wants to make his name in aviation, William Boeing.
Very excited to tell you about Boeing's new plane.
Oh!
Nothing like it.
With the roaring 20s in full swing, a skyscraper war begins as Chrysler looks to own the skyline.
So why are you building the tallest building in the world?
So he can look down on GM.
But DuPont won't be outdone and plans a building of his own.
Same height as Chrysler's.
Make it taller and I'm in.
The Empire State Building.
Just like you said. Mr. Morgan? Mr. Morgan, what are the best investments and what is your opinion on U.S. steel?
I'll say this. General Motors stock is very undervalued.
Mr. Morgan, one more please.
Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, one more please. One more question, please.
Thank you, gentlemen.
By 1929, Wall Street has become the most famous street in America. And J.P. Morgan Jr. is its king.
There's a saying about J.P. Morgan Jr. and his partners in the late 1920s. They're called Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles. And so that gives you some sense of the stature of J.P. Morgan Jr. on Wall Street. He says, in effect, I think GM's future looks bright. And GM stock surges in price, and then the stock market follows.
Thanks to Morgan and his fellow bankers, the stock market has climbed nearly 40% in just 1 year. To investors, and even ordinary Americans, there's a sense that you can't lose.
Think about the roaring 20s. It was the go-go. Everybody was optimistic. Markets were soaring. When it's so easy for anybody to go get out a loan and then go speculate.
And not just speculation from professional investors, but this was the first time that Joe on the street saw the stock market going up and decided, I'm gonna go get myself a loan to buy stock. And by the way, I'm gonna make a handsome profit doing it.
It was a boom like we've never had it. There was a belief that we were in the Emerald City.
Day by day, we were nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land.
One industry in particular reaps the rewards from the soaring economy: automobiles. In 1929, Americans spend $500 million on new cars.
The American automobile industry had a larger economy than every country on Earth, with the exception of Germany, France, Britain, maybe the Soviet Union.
80% of the entire U.S. car market is controlled by just 3 companies. DuPont's General Motors has the top spot, while Ford is second. And then there's Chrysler.
Okay, fellas, let's take a look.
In the 8 years since he left GM, he's grown his company into the number 3 automaker in America. But he's determined to be number 1.
Here, let me show you this.
And in order to do that, he's going to take things to another level by raising the competition to new heights.
See here, the glass stretches up to the 3rd floor. I want it to feel like you're stepping through the doorway and into a city.
He's recently started construction on a tower that he plans to make the tallest in the world. He calls it the Chrysler Building.
Business entrepreneurs at the top of their game, it's about personal dynamics and relationships that they have with their colleagues and their peers and their rivals. And they want to beat them. And whether it's a business or whether it's my house is bigger or my building is bigger, that's the game. And that's how it's all scored.
The skyscraper's construction is a monumental feat. 30,000 tons of steel and more than 3 million bricks will be needed. In a building this size, every single detail matters.
One of the key innovations in Chrysler's building was the world's fastest elevators. And the building had the longest continuous elevator shaft in the world at the time.
But Chrysler doesn't just want his tower to be the tallest. It also must be the most beautiful.
Every entrepreneur knows what their special sauce is, what their greatest skill is. With Chrysler, his was beauty and precision.
This is Narosta stainless steel. It's German.
Walter Chrysler, whatever he did, he was going to be the best at it.
All right.
He was going to build the most beautiful skyscraper. It was going to be the tallest. It was going to be the talk of the world.
We are high above street level, about 1,000 feet high in the air, on the Chrysler building, looking over Lexington Avenue.
As it nears completion in the summer of 1929, Chrysler wants to make sure the world takes notice.
Mr. Chrysler.
So he hires one of America's top photographers to document the building.
Well, let me show you what I've got going on
Yes,
here, huh?
please do.
So.
Margaret Bourke-White is an amazing photographer who's known for her photos of factories and city life and architecture. And one of the reasons that she stands out is that she's willing to go places that no one else will, just for that perfect shot.
Dangling high above Manhattan, Bourke-White captures the spectacle of Chrysler's building. Her death-defying photos help make Chrysler and his building the biggest news of the year. But Chrysler has competition. Less than 10 blocks away, Du Pont has grand plans for a skyscraper of his own. The Empire State Building. They've demolished the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel and have raised over $40 million for the construction of the building. Over $500 million in today's dollars. But now, with Chrysler so far ahead, some are questioning whether the project is worth the investment.
What do you think we should do?
We're gonna build.
Du Pont has no interest in standing down. He's going to continue until he beats Chrysler. So he keeps pushing the architects to make the building taller.
They'll be coming from a factory in Pittsburgh, and we'll be ordering 250,000 tons.
There was this sort of personal rivalry among architects. So you have developers who have these big egos who are trying to outdo each other. You have the architects who are also sort of part of this game.
The newspapers begin referring to it as the skyscraper race.
It's often impossible to keep your plans to add height secret because you have to file these plans with the buildings department.
But now, with competition heating up and construction nearly complete, Chrysler is starting to worry. He wants to make sure, when all is said and done, there's no question whose building is tallest.
So he went to his architect and he says, you go back to the drawing board and you add extra height. You figure out some way that we can make our building even taller.
For months, Chrysler's team has been working on a secret project. Tomorrow, he plans to unveil it to the world.
Let's go, let's go! Let's go! Hold on, hold on!
Within the crown of the building, hidden from view, Chrysler's team has constructed a massive steel spike. Now, in the dark of night, the team raises the metal structure through the top of the building.
Hello?
With the first rays of the dawn, Chrysler's steel spire can be seen piercing the sky. Overnight, Chrysler has added nearly 200 feet to his building, surpassing even the Eiffel Tower. The Chrysler building is indisputably the tallest structure that humans have ever created.
Chrysler was more than willing to spend a significant amount of money to have his building express a sort of modern architectural view of the world and to reflect his power and his success.
It's a huge moment for the Titan.
It's the flapper of buildings. It's jazz as an edifice. It is all the audacity, all the bombast of the 1920s, captured in concrete and steel.
Look at it. I did. You showed me the front.
It was so sexy and so new looking and so fresh and so striking that if my building looks like this, well, certainly the cars have got to be something pretty special. So it was the biggest billboard for a brand that was ever built.
The Chrysler Building at 42nd Street in Lexington is the tallest structure in the world. Its gigantic tower dominates the city and can be seen from nearly everywhere. From it, the views of Manhattan are sublime, its silver spire flashing in the sun. A monument of wealth and social prestige. But New York is not only steel and stone, it is people too. Millions of beating hearts, lights and shadows, tears and laughter, work and play, night and day. And so it moves from the memories of yesterday into the promise of tomorrow.
Less than 24 hours after Walter Chrysler tops out his building, the U.S. stock market is taking a nosedive.
In the year before the stock market crash in 1929, fortunes are being made all over the place. And there's this belief, this optimism, that the bull market will never end. No one could have foreseen what was coming in October of 1929.
In an instant, the roaring 20s are over. And the fortunes of the titans and the entire country will never be the same.
What's the position on Standard Oil?
Standard Oil down by 14% and dropping. U.S. Steel down to 200.
Sell now instead of stock gap?
Full position on Standard Oil.
In just 3 days, the stock market loses almost half its value. After a decade of reckless spending, investors suddenly start to get nervous and begin offloading shares by the tens of millions. It's the biggest sell-off in history.
Traders know what that feels like, and they know what it means. It starts to feed on itself, and the momentum just picks up so rapidly. And so when the market started selling off in 1929, it snowballed.
If you're a stockbroker looking up at a board in 1929 and just watching the numbers tick down minute by minute by minute, it'll make your heart stop. I think that there were people who just couldn't even fathom what they were looking at.
J.P. Morgan is watching his world crumble before his eyes. But he knows, if anyone can pull the country out of the crisis, it's him.
Mr. Morgan, what's happening? Has the stock market stopped falling? The worst is over. Everything's going to be okay. Are you sure? Trust me. Everything's going to be fine.
JP Morgan says things are fine. Everybody goes back and buys.
U.S. Steel up to 170.
Good.
By the power of his word alone, J.P. Morgan turns around the stock market and makes sure that he buys at the lowest point to make a huge profit. Most people think the Great Depression began right after the stock market crash.
No, the crash of '29 is considered the start of the Great Depression. In fact, it took another couple of years before the full depth of this depression hit the American public.
So in the world of the stock market, there's this thing called a V-shaped recovery. Meaning we go down real quick and come back real quick. So in the brief aftermath of the crash, there actually was a little V. And at the time, they thought it was a big V.
We put in the order for 100.
With the crash seemingly over, DuPont decides he's still going to beat Chrysler with the tallest building in the world, the Empire State Building.
In the fall of 1929, Raskob and DuPont, they're crunching the numbers. From DuPont's point of view, it made perfect sense to go forward. There was every reason to believe at that point that their project would be economically successful.
But Chrysler's new spire has complicated DuPont's plan. So his architects add floors to increase the height.
And we'll be taller.
Yes, 1,054 feet.
And the Chrysler building?
1,050 feet.
So we'll be 4 feet taller.
Yes.
The original plans for the Empire State Building was just to have a flat top at a height that was greater than Chrysler's building.
4 feet. Chrysler could stick an umbrella on top and say he's taller.
But evidently, that wasn't enough comfort, there wasn't enough room to be sure that they were going to have the world's tallest building. So in December of 1929, they announced that they have come up with this plan to erect a 250-foot high structure, which is mostly decorative. So that is a statement. DuPont wanted to literally and figuratively put Walter Chrysler's building in the shade.
To create a building of this magnitude, DuPont oversees the most ambitious construction project in American history. Every day, 57,000 tons of steel arrive from Pittsburgh.
All the materials, all the steel and the stone and the piping, everything needed to arrive at the site just in time for when it was to be put in place. The legend has it that the steel was still warm to the touch.
A new floor is added each day, thanks in part to the talents of a new group of workers.
Native American ironworkers from the Mohawk tribe actually play a role in the construction of the Empire State Building. They're sought-after ironworkers because they're recognized as masters of the craft and for being fearless because of their ability to work hundreds of feet in the air.
The Empire State Building is a true colossus, 3 times wider than the Chrysler Building, and the first building in the world to have more than 100 floors. For Chrysler, it's a disaster. His enemy's building is overtaking him right before his eyes. Chrysler decides his only move is to try to stop the construction. Chrysler launches a smear campaign
Take 2.
to make people doubt that the Empire State Building is structurally sound.
And action.
Do you think it's possible to build anything taller than the Chrysler Building?
No, I do not.
Skyscrapers must have seemed as strange to people as electricity once had. They saw these massive buildings arising out of the landscape, and many wondered if they'd topple over.
A taller construction has the potential to develop stress fractures, which could lead to catastrophic failure.
So you're saying that the Chrysler Building will be the tallest building for the foreseeable future?
DuPont knows this is just Chrysler being Chrysler. Construction continues without delay. The sooner he can top out his skyscraper, the sooner he can claim victory over Walter Chrysler. But as it nears completion, Chrysler takes one last swing, saying the tower shouldn't count, since it's decorative. Coming from the person who pushed a metal spire up to make his building taller. DuPont responds by taking a page out of Chrysler's playbook. He tells the press that the tower is far more than just decorative. It's a docking station for airships. And he can prove it.
They announced a plan to erect a mooring mast where airships could anchor, then passengers would then exit the airship and then they would go down the elevator. But these things are utter fiction.
In fact, no airship ever docked with DuPont's tower. The photograph he distributed to the newspapers was a fake, created by a specialist a half-century before Photoshop.
They knew at the time that the mooring mast would never be able to moor airships. The truth is, when you're 1,250 feet in the air, the forces of wind are incredible. There did not exist a captain who was willing to dock at the top of the Empire State Building. The mooring mast, if anything, was a kind of exclamation point, a way to say this race is over. There's no way you can beat us now.
The Empire State Building officially opens. In just 2 years, the New York skyline has been permanently altered, thanks to competing egos. And Pierre Du Pont can now say he built the tallest structure on Earth. But it quickly turns into a hollow victory. Nobody is leasing office space. The Empire State Building is virtually empty.
There's a bit of a myth about what really happened in terms of the timing around the Great Depression. It looked after 1929 that things might be okay, but just for a moment. The V-shaped recovery, you could call it just like a check mark before a real swoon.
By 1931, the Great Depression has arrived. And this time, not even J.P. Morgan can stop it.
House and property is estimated at $7.3 million. Commercial properties, including the Manhattan office, hold value at $12.6 million. Liquid cash holdings are approximately $256 million and change.
As the Great Depression takes hold, the House of Morgan is cut in size by half.
Furniture, vehicles, non-commercial ancillary properties.
For God's sake, get to the point.
Overall assets down by $400 million.
So it is dramatically affected.
The stock market loses 90% of its value, and America faces another unforeseen disaster. The nation's banks begin to fail.
So we all put our deposits in a bank, and we expect to get that money back with some interest. But if we all get scared, then I want to run to the bank before you do. I want to pull my money out before you do, and then everybody pulls out. That's a bank run, and the bank collapses.
By the end of 1931, 3,000 banks have closed, and with them, billions of dollars simply vanish.
To watch your net worth disappear, in some cases, in a matter of minutes and hours. I know they're just numbers, but there's a reality behind that. And there are so many people who lived through that period, and it changed them. It changed them forever.
Half the active manpower of the United States drifting helplessly in search of work. Marriages off 22%. Birth rate down sharply. Suicide rate 40% higher than...
By the beginning of 1932, the world's strongest economy has ground to a halt.
And this becomes the deepest, longest-lasting economic downturn, not just in U.S. history. It's a global phenomenon with a devastating impact.
Spending is down across the board. In New York City, no one is leasing office space in DuPont's new tower. The press is calling it the empty State Building. The news from his car company is even worse. GM's sales are down by 2/3. And Walter Chrysler is doing just as badly.
The reality is, if you've lost everything and you can't even afford to feed yourself, the last thing on your mind is going to be buying a new automobile.
Henry Ford initially believes he's well positioned to ride out the Depression.
Henry Ford, he never trusted Wall Street. He thought Wall Street was gambling and that it was to rip off the folks.
All good here, fellas?
So when the Great Depression hit and every company stocks are going downwards, you're watching Henry Ford say, I don't play the stock market.
But before long, the Depression catches up with him too. Ford hasn't seen car sales so low since before World War I. Ford's airplanes are doing even worse.
Two things happened with Ford Aviation at the beginning of the Depression. One is the demand for $50,000 airplanes dried up almost instantly. And the other thing that happened was there was a number of crashes.
Within the span of a single year, there were 4 major crashes of Ford-tried motors that killed over 40 people. In several cases, everyone aboard the aircraft died.
Of course I tried 6 times. You're welcome to try them yourself. No, that's not what I meant. Look, nobody's flying. Yeah, I'm doing it.
There's one person Edsel knows could convince the public the tri-motors are safe. But Ford's partner in aviation, Charles Lindbergh, is dealing with a crisis of his own. In 1932, Lindbergh's 20-month-old son is kidnapped.
Everything about Charles Lindbergh was a big story. The birth of his baby was a big story. And then when that child was kidnapped, it was the biggest story in the United States.
And then, his child is found dead. The press refuse to leave him alone. Lindbergh is devastated.
What if we rebuilt it with the metal, you know, like aluminum? Dad, wasn't expecting you. Everything okay?
It's time to cut our losses.
What are you talking about?
I'm shutting Ford Aviation down.
But we have orders. It could be huge.
It's over. Can I trust you to make this happen?
Sure, Dad. Whatever you want.
Good.
Edsel was devastated. One of his friends said that they had never seen him so depressed. Just like that, Edsel Ford's whole identity, his whole future, what he thought it was going to be, was gone.
But while most Titans are struggling to survive the Great Depression, one is thriving: William Boeing.
Even though there was a depression going on in the rest of the United States, there were still lucrative airmail contracts for the U.S. government. And so it was a very good time, especially for Boeing in the early 1930s.
Americans might not be buying cars or taking trips, but they're sending more letters than ever. And Boeing's planes are moving them. Boeing now controls most of the airmail business, but he wants all of it.
Mr. President.
He's come to Washington to make his case to the president, Herbert Hoover.
Now, you and I both know there's no oversight. Do you honestly believe you're not being blood dry? I play by rules, but these other guys, they're raking you over the coals.
Mr. Boeing.
Mr. President.
William Boeing convinced the Hoover administration that these small, independent companies that had airmail contracts were actually cheating the federal government. Boeing argued, you really should be trusting reliable, dependable, trustworthy companies like my company with the airmail contracts. And amazingly, the Hoover administration agreed.
The new routes are worth millions of dollars for Boeing's growing business. While the rest of the industry struggles to survive, Boeing buys up aviation companies for pennies on the dollar and adds them to his empire.
Bill Boeing makes this incredible vertical business, airplanes, engines, propellers. He has a school to train pilots and mechanics, and he even builds his own airfield. Everything under one corporation.
After acquiring smaller companies across the country, he unites them into the largest airline the world has ever seen and calls the new company United. By 1932, William Boeing has expanded his empire with his newly formed United Airlines. But for most Americans, the Depression is taking a devastating toll.
When the stock market crashed, Herbert Hoover thought it was just a weird spasm in the stock market and we would come back, so he didn't do anything. And meanwhile, people suffered like you can't even imagine. People were living in little shanty towns. They started being called Hoovervilles. We were in deep, dark shape.
Things went from bad to worse so quickly that American business was in grave peril. They need consumers, they need a sound currency, they need a sound banking system, they need an overall economy that's going to function well at a macro level if they're going to remain profitable themselves.
DuPont has closed GM factories and laid off workers, and still he's losing millions. In New York, Wall Street is a ghost town, and J.P. Morgan is bleeding money.
By 1932, as the Depression tightens and deepens, as millions of more Americans go on the unemployment rolls, as the savagery of the Great Depression becomes more apparent, J.P. Morgan Jr. and the House of Morgan, they begin to doubt Hoover.
Many American business leaders thought that Herbert Hoover's administration handled it so poorly, they needed decisive action.
Morgan and DuPont decide the time has come for a change. With an election coming, they make it their mission to get President Hoover kicked out of office. They've found their candidate, an elite like them, from one of the most respected political families in America.
Governor.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Mr. Morgan. My friend, Pierre Du Pont. Good to meet you, sir.
Good to meet you.
Franklin Roosevelt was an aristocratic child, a patrician, born on the Hudson River, lived there, went to prep school, went to Harvard.
He was very much in the upper class in New York. He could really communicate extremely well with people from all classes, all religions, all races, etc.
Although he conceals it from the public, FDR has lived with polio since the age of 39.
He didn't do anything to bring on his polio. Now for the rest of his life, he couldn't walk again unaided. And the essence of the Great Depression for millions of Americans was, I didn't do anything wrong, but the sky fell in upon me. And Roosevelt was able to connect with those people.
Mr. Harris's office, please. We'll wake him up.
Morgan and Du Pont throw their influence and their money behind FDR.
Let's talk about the Roosevelt campaign. Yes, I want to talk to you about the Roosevelt campaign. We're very excited about Roosevelt. I think he's all right.
DuPont and the House of Morgan, in turning their attention away from Herbert Hoover and embracing FDR and supporting FDR with their money, this really was an example of an early super PAC.
On the campaign trail, FDR is greeted by huge crowds. He blames Hoover for the nation's misery and positions himself as the candidate of change, promising desperate Americans a New Deal.
Franklin Roosevelt was very fuzzy on what the New Deal was going to be. He simply promised that the government would be more active and be more helpful. But it wasn't clear what that meant. All they knew was it sounded a whole lot better than the very quiet and seemingly too little too late ideas of Herbert Hoover.
I am confident.
He was a great politician, FDR, and he was able to appeal to the unemployed, the working people, without startling the rich industrial titans.
We'll wait and see.
FDR wins the election in a landslide. His inaugural address brings hope to millions.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Good morning, sir.
And there must be an end to a conduct in banking and in business which too often has given to a sacred trust the likeness of callous and selfish wrongdoing.
The speech is one of the great political speeches of the 20th century.
Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion.
And the Morgan bankers, they're expecting that their voice will be listened to in the White House, as it has been more or less since 1918. Incorrectly, as it transpired.
They have resorted.
In the speech, Roosevelt says the first thing he's going to do is go after the bankers.
This nation is asking for action, and action now.
And within 2 weeks, FDR turns on Morgan and comes for him. J.P. Morgan Jr. helped put Franklin Roosevelt into office. But now, the president is coming after him.
How many? The hell is this?
To pull America out of the Depression, FDR is targeting the people he thinks caused the crash. Bankers.
Roosevelt needed an enemy in order to justify the major changes he knew he would have to undertake to get the economy moving. And he was a good enough politician to know that you had to find an enemy that many people would hate.
And J.P. Morgan was an obvious person. His name was synonymous with Wall Street. So just like today, if you're upset with big business, you call Jeff Bezos to testify before Congress and Mark Zuckerberg. Well, J.P. Morgan was that guy.
Now, FDR intends to create a public spectacle to ensure that J.P. Morgan becomes the face of the stock market crash. Roosevelt taps a tough New York lawyer, Ferdinand Pecora, to call Morgan before Congress.
The hearings, as it turned out, were the subject of extraordinary interest.
Mr. Morgan, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was late May, early June, and it was unusually hot in Washington, D.C. And there was no air conditioning in those days. It was torrid in every sense of the word.
You know what proportion of your total business and total profits arise from your transactions on the stock exchange?
Oh, I wouldn't know offhand. It would take a long time to find out.
What was the reason for not keeping any minutes or other written record of the proceedings?
Well, for reasons of convenience. Take a man's time to write them up, and they'd be of no use to you.
Indeed. Did you manipulate the stock market for your own gains? Yes?
Yes, no.
Mr. Morgan, please answer the question. Yes or no?
The hearings accomplish exactly what FDR wanted. Millions of Americans now believe that J.P. Morgan and his Wall Street elites led the nation to ruin.
FDR was not going to coddle the rich. He genuinely believed that the concentration of power in a few hands was bad for our country.
But Roosevelt is doing more than just pinning the crash on J.P. Morgan. He's drawing a line in the sand between the rich elites and the rest of the country.
He picked his enemies carefully, and he cast them as these dinosaurs who have only their own moneyed interests at heart. And we need to get them out of the way so that the American people can live up to the American dream.
To prove once and for all which side he's on, FDR is going to take down another titan who got him elected. Pierre Du Pont. And to do it, FDR will capitalize on a best-selling book about World War I.
The idea behind the Merchants of Death was that the United States government and the American people were dragged into war, were duped into war by bankers, by industrialists, by people who were going to profit from war. And one of the chief villains that they arrive at is DuPont. Pierre Du Pont and the DuPont company were deeply offended by this. They really, genuinely did not see that they had done anything criminal.
DuPont soon finds himself the subject of a congressional inquiry.
You charge the government $100 million to build your smokeless powder plants, and then another $200 million in operating expenses. The DuPont company pocketed a profit of nearly $50 million, while thousands of soldiers were sent to their death. you are quite simply a war profiteer, an outlaw, operating not in accordance with the interests of our
For DuPont,
but rather in accordance with your personal
everything he's tried to leave behind resurfaces.
DuPont and the DuPont Company get the label of being a merchant of death, which is catchy and horrific. Franklin Roosevelt was a very, very gifted politician. And he saw this as a real opportunity to appeal to American voters. If DuPont was vilified in the process, that's the price of politics.
This nation is asking for action, and action now.
For DuPont, his family name and reputation have been dragged through the mud. But for Morgan, his entire empire is being threatened. Congress passes a law that sets new rules for how Morgan can operate. His banking empire will be broken up.
You have these titans who are used to calling all the shots, who are used to having things go their way. They didn't like government interference.
Unable to conduct business how he wants in America, Morgan turns his focus to an area FDR can't touch, outside of the U.S.
J.P. Morgan Jr. loaned millions of dollars to various countries to finance all kinds of regimes. It was financing the British Empire. It was financing the French Republic. And it was financing Japan and Germany as well.
But Germany now has a new leader. Adolf Hitler. Loaning them money is a decision that Morgan will come to regret. After cracking down on Morgan and DuPont, FDR turns to phase 2 of his recovery plan, getting the country back to work.
President Roosevelt told the nation that the project would set an example of planning for all the generations to come.
Roads and trails are being made safe and easy for motor cars.
Democracy had stepped on the gas.
FDR went in fast mode with his New Deal programs, where you would build bridges and roads and infrastructure to constantly put some form of funding into middle-class, poor, and unemployed people's hands.
FDR chooses one project to be the centerpiece of his New Deal. It will require a massive workforce and 4 million cubic yards of concrete. A project this big would be a perfect fit for industrial titans like Ford or DuPont. But FDR doesn't trust them. So he gives it to an unknown. His name is Henry Kaiser.
Henry Kaiser starts out at the bottom of the construction industry. He's the son of immigrants. He comes from humble origins. He doesn't go to Ivy League schools. The one thing he learns early on is that he was always willing to work harder and longer than anyone else.
I need to know if we can get the foundations in early this month.
One day, he'll have so many people working for him that he starts a healthcare company for his workers, Kaiser Permanente.
All of this here, all of this is going to have to come out.
But right now, he's a nobody. Now Kaiser's been given the job of his life. Far out west, in the hot, barren desert, Kaiser's project is already underway. If completed, it will be the most ambitious engineering project America has ever built. The Hoover Dam. Initial construction began under Herbert Hoover, blasting enormous tunnels through solid rock to divert the Colorado River. Now, more than 2 years into the project, the riverbed is dry and ready, but the dam itself hasn't been started. The press is calling it the $50 million hole in the ground.
It was in an unimaginably hostile environment of desert heat, of dust.
Where's my engineer?
Men who worked on it said that conditions were harsher than anything they had ever experienced.
But Kaiser has run into a serious problem. Constructing the largest dam in the world requires a massive amount of concrete.
120. This is way too hot.
Enough to pave a 2-lane highway from San Francisco to New York.
What's it at?
120 after 72 hours. It's not enough. What do you think we should do?
I need you to monitor this closely and let me know as soon as anything changes. We need to take the temperature down.
Pouring this much concrete can result in a very dangerous outcome: cracking.
Concrete emits heat as it cures, and if it's not cooled properly, you'll get cracks in the concrete, and the entire structure will be much weaker, and in fact, it might fail. There was so much concrete going into Hoover Dam, experts estimated that it would take more than a century to fully cool down. In 1928, just a couple of years before the Hoover Dam project began, the St. Francis Dam in California had failed. The reservoir behind St. Francis emptied in 11 minutes and then swept toward the coast, taking people and houses and livestock with it. 450 people lost their lives.
Kaiser needs to figure out a solution quickly, or he could jeopardize FDR's New Deal. And his project will be one of the most expensive failures in American history. In the Nevada desert, the biggest, most important project in FDR's New Deal is underway. But Henry Kaiser has a problem. He needs to find a way to cool 4 million cubic yards of concrete as it hardens, or the Hoover Dam will fail.
Henry Chrysler was someone who said, get the job done no matter what it takes. And a good example of that is the challenge they have when they have to figure out how to cool the concrete used in the construction of the Hoover Dam. He and his team figure out they can do this by cooling it from the inside out.
Kaiser embeds nearly 600 miles of piping into the concrete and then pumps chilled river water through it.
Henry Kaiser built a whole refrigeration plant to cool the water that would be pumped through the dam to help it cool properly.
With chilled water running through every section of the dam, the concrete cools in a fraction of the time.
I think one of the critical components to being successful in business is being decisive. Because you're going to have a lot of naysayers, so you're going to have to be decisive that, no, I believe this is going to work. I'm going to put all my energy behind it.
Over 20,000 people will work on the Hoover Dam. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. All across America, FDR's New Deal programs are creating millions of well-paying jobs. And for the first time in years, people start to feel optimistic about the future.
Money is circulating in the hands of people, and the assumption is that this might actually stimulate the economy.
Good morning, Mr. Boeing.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. You are the first Americans to witness the future of aviation.
By late 1933, Boeing rules the skies, and he's even built a passenger plane like no one's ever seen before.
The Boeing 247 is faster than any other civilian plane, boasting a top speed of over 200 miles per hour. You can have breakfast in New York and be in Los Angeles in time to catch the sunset.
The Boeing 247 was a huge step forward in aviation, both in design as well as aviation technology. Its sleek, single-wing, all-metal Art Deco design just looks like a modern airplane.
Boeing is betting that soon the public will be flying again. And he's completely changing the entire flying experience.
Bill Boeing's airline hired 8 nurses to care for the passengers, ease their fears, and take care of them if they're sick during the flight. These were the first flight attendants in the world.
Smile for the cameras, ladies.
With his new plane and growing control of the skies, who could possibly stop him now? Just one man, the president. He believes the government should be in charge of mail, not Boeing. A scandal gives FDR his opening.
Mr. President.
The airmail scandal was a disaster for William Boeing. It really took the shine off of his company's reputation because newspapers across the country were running front-page stories about corruption and bribery and graft, and suddenly William Boeing's entire aviation empire is now under the scrutiny of the public.
FDR believed that there was an unfair advantage given to these large corporate titans to make profits at the expense of the American people. And so the charges of monopoly really drove Roosevelt to act.
William Boeing? Yes? What's this?
FDR terminates all of Boeing's airmail contracts. In the wake of a scandal, FDR takes away all of William Boeing's airmail contracts. For Boeing, it's a catastrophe.
William Boeing was counting on that revenue and income to continue to invest in and expand his business. So without those airmail contracts, he has now lost one of the only sources of guaranteed income in the 1930s.
Roosevelt believes that just like with the Hoover Dam, airmail is best left in the trusted hands of the government.
There had been corruption and bribery involved, and so President Roosevelt decided the U.S. Army Air Corps, the early American Air Force, would deliver the mail.
The Army Air Corps now have to pick up where these very experienced pilots who had been flying every day over well-proven routes and scheduled airlines, they now have to pick it up and carry that forward.
The Army realizes immediately just how unprepared they are for the job. Their planes are leftovers from World War I, and most of the pilots are inexperienced.
They don't have the planes, they don't have the infrastructure in terms of flying day and night, around the clock, in all types of weather operations.
For the young pilots flying old planes, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
In a span of 6 weeks, you have more than 60 crashes, killing many young airmail pilots. It was a public relations nightmare for FDR.
Roosevelt realizes he has no choice. He reverses his decision and gives the airmail business back to private industry.
It was a big humiliation for Roosevelt. He had just been elected a year before, and he was flying high. He was very popular because of the New Deal, and this was his first real political defeat.
But when FDR does give airmail back, there's a huge catch. The government will no longer permit companies to both build planes and fly them. Boeing's empire is broken up. But the president doesn't stop there. As punishment for creating a monopoly, FDR specifically bans William Boeing for life from ever flying airmail again. It's a staggering blow to the aviation titan.
Bill Boeing was very angry, disappointed to be attacked by the government, to be accused of being a criminal. It crushed him. It was more than he could accept.
In just 2 decades, William Boeing turned a small plane-making business into the largest aviation empire in the world, taking out industrial giants along the way. Now, while the company bearing his name will restructure and live on, William Boeing is forced into retirement. FDR has taken down another titan. After the Boeing scandal, FDR wants to make sure all American businesses play by the rules. So he passes a sweeping new law, forcing companies to allow unions.
This was an extraordinary moment. This shifted the power structure of American industry entirely.
It became clear that business leaders didn't know what workers wanted or workers needed. And this was Roosevelt's way of trying to show the American public that he could maintain capitalism, but improve the lives of those who were stuck in the system, often in horrible jobs, by making their jobs better.
To industrial giants, the law is an attack on capitalism.
It was a huge change. Government is going to tell you to some degree how to run your own business. People become entrepreneurs because they don't like other people telling them what to do. And now all of a sudden the government's trying to tell them what to do. They didn't like it a bit.
No one hates it more than Henry Ford.
Yes. No, I've only just heard. My God, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. No, I'll talk to them myself.
What FDR was basically saying was, yes, you guys have huge power, but that power needs to be balanced.
The early Henry Ford of the Model T era was seen as the ultimate people's person because of his $5 a day to workers. But he didn't believe in the union movement. And so if you were a union activist working in Henry Ford facility, you weren't going to keep your job for very long.
Ford calls Roosevelt a tyrant and says he'll never negotiate with unions.
Henry Ford felt threatened by FDR. The problem for Henry Ford and many industrialists at the time was that they saw the federal government trying to dictate how they ran their businesses. And this did not sit well with Henry Ford. Nobody was going to tell Henry Ford how to run his own business.
Heads of businesses never want regulations. They never want rules. No one does. But at that time in history, the everyday American, the everyday worker, wanted better rights. In the middle of a depression, these titans' cries fell on deaf ears because they weren't the most important voice.
By 1935, Franklin Roosevelt is as popular as ever. And out west, the president celebrates a major victory for his New Deal: the dedication of the Hoover Dam.
Rising 726 feet above the bedrock of the river and altering the geography of a whole region, we are here to celebrate the completion of the greatest dam in the world.
Hoover Dam changed the United States. It brought electricity to thousands and thousands of American families, and it put tens of thousands of people to work, not just in the building of the dam, but then in the management of the dam. Hoover Dam was in some ways the perfect New Deal project. It brought light to people, it brought hope to people, and it also brought confidence. We could do new things, we could achieve things again, we could overcome fear.
Remarkably absent from the dam's opening is the man who built it, Henry Kaiser. FDR has already sent him off to oversee more projects, like the Oakland Bay Bridge and the Grand Coulee Dam, 2 jobs worth $250 million alone. It's a massive investment in America, which FDR pays for by significantly raising taxes on America's richest titans.
The Roosevelt administration needed to find ways to fund the New Deal. And one of those was a wealth tax.
Roosevelt had the audacity to raise the wealth tax up to as much as 75%. And he scared the bejesus out of industrial titans.
Morgan is so angry with Roosevelt that it becomes personal, and he can't stand to read or hear anything about FDR.
Wait.
In fact, there's a story that Morgan's servants are instructed to cut out all references to FDR in the paper.
Thank you.
Morgan himself saw FDR as a class traitor, as a charlatan, as a left-wing hack who betrayed his own class in order to help the masses. And this to him was a cardinal sin.
For Du Pont, whose reputation has already been destroyed by FDR, the wealth tax is the last straw. He calls on other titans of industry to do something about it.
Gentlemen, we have been vilified for all the country's ills. We've become pariahs. And it's all because of this president. So, we all know what we have to do.
All of these guys hated FDR. He was raising 75% taxes on them. He was a fan of labor unions, and he openly talked about how he hated the banks. They thought he was a socialist.
Together they form the American Liberty League. It's a bold move with one clear mission: stop FDR from getting reelected.
Many different industry leaders, even competitors within the auto industry, came together in the Liberty League because they shared a concern about the way Roosevelt was using his political power to limit what they wanted to do. And nothing brings competitors together better than a common enemy.
They back a candidate to run against FDR, Alf Landon. They know if elected, Landon will do what they want, so they bankroll his campaign.
Let's drink.
With Du Pont fronting almost a third of it. By election night, they hope it's enough.
President Roosevelt was cheery as ever when he went into the booth to record his own vote, and a few hours afterwards his optimism was justified. Broadway went mad as the former president was returned again with the biggest majority ever known in American politics.
In an election of 42 million votes, the president wins the most overwhelming victory in the country's history, in the greatest popular election in the history of the world.
FDR has been re-elected president in a landslide. He carries all but 2 states. The Liberty League's efforts are for nothing.
The Liberty League failed for one very simple reason. Roosevelt's policies were working. The Liberty League had a very weak argument. What were they defending? Going back to Herbert Hoover? Who would support that?
FDR's re-election means 4 more years of fighting with the White House. At this point, the Titans and FDR are bitter adversaries. But what none of them realize is the real enemy is 4,000 miles away. He's building up his army and is growing more powerful every day. Since the devastating loss of his son, Charles Lindbergh has been in hiding. But now he's back in the pilot's seat, testing a new plane for Hitler.
Charles Lindbergh had been living in Europe since the early 30s. Lindbergh had had it with the press after his child was kidnapped and murdered.
Hitler has spent the last 5 years building a massive military. His Luftwaffe Air Force is the crown jewel, and he wants the world to know.
While living in Europe, Lindbergh was invited to come to Germany by Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe.
Lindbergh is the first American to see the German war machine up close.
This is part of his legacy. Charles Lindbergh went from being an American hero to a friend of the Nazis.
To Hitler, the American hero is the perfect pawn to deliver Germany's message.
Hitler hoped that Lindbergh would be incredibly impressed with the progress that the Germans had made in terms of aircraft production, and he proved to be right.
Upon returning to America, Lindbergh brings a dire warning.
The Messerschmitt is not like any other plane. It's in a different league, and trust me, I have flown the best.
What makes it so good?
It's fast, 380 miles an hour, the fastest in the world. And it can fly higher than any other plane, 20,000 feet.
How many do they have?
Around 5,000, but they are building more. Bombers, too. If there was a war, no country in Europe would stand a chance against Germany. Come to think of it, neither would America.
Lindbergh was incredibly impressed by the new bombers, the new fighters that Germany had developed. He did exactly what Hitler wanted him to. He basically told the rest of the world that he thought Germany was invincible.
By 1937, Hitler's army is 500,000 strong and is on track to quadruple in size in less than 2 years. And there's more bad news. Japan has just invaded China and also has built up a huge army.
Suddenly, you have two superpower armies, and it's obvious they're on the march.
There is widespread rejoicing. Now, say the Japanese generals, it is our turn. Japan marches in China. Again, there is
FDR realizes war is inevitable.
As he saw Japan going to war against China, Roosevelt thought, okay, this is trouble. The United States will suffer if the Japanese gain control of East Asia. As Germany rearmed for war, he saw how the United States would inevitably get involved, drawn into a war in Europe.
But there's a huge problem. During the Depression, FDR has been focusing on rebuilding America's economy and infrastructure, and spent virtually no money on its own military.
America's situation, as far as being prepared for fighting a modern war, was pretty abysmal. We had maybe the 18th largest military in the world. Holland had a bigger military than we did. Hungary had a better military than we did.
FDR knows he must quickly build up America's military. Tanks, ships, planes, munitions. On an industrial scale never before attempted in American history.
America's going to need to build hundreds of factories and hire millions of workers. And there are really only a few people in the country equipped in that moment to be able to do that. Titans like Ford, Du Pont, Morgan, Chrysler, and Boeing.
I think there's an irony that Roosevelt has to turn to some of the people he vilified, but that's how American capitalism works.
And now, FDR needs these titans, the very people he's condemned, to help save the world. Next time, on the Titans that built America. As World War II begins in Europe, FDR needs help preparing for battle.
You're asking me to start producing munitions again.
The president is asking as well.
same president who labeled me the merchant of death.
After years of the Great Depression, Americans have no appetite for another crisis.
You can tell FDR that Ford makes cars, not planes. If he wants planes, you can tell him to go to a damn plane maker.
But a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor changes everything.
Sir, please come quickly.
Bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy 39.
It will take America's industrial might to build the greatest war machine on Earth, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
We're moving as fast as we can, but every adjustment means a delay in assembly.
We have a problem with the M3. They're a complete disaster.
Now, the Titans must put aside their differences with each other and FDR and unite.
Their goal is to create a sustained nuclear chain reaction.
The fate of the world rests in their hands.
It's only a matter of time.